Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Terry Lee, and I'm with the ProTech Group. Our topic today is fast-track regulatory compliance with AI-powered solutions, and I'm very excited to share this session with our partner, 4C Risk AI, a leader in regulatory change management powered by AI technology. Let's go ahead and get started. First, a moment about housekeeping. Just a couple of things that I want to cover before we get into the material. We're going to discuss regulatory compliance management and the significant advancements made by using 4C Risk's AI technology. Now, this discussion period will take about 20 minutes. Our presenters will cover a range of topics in that time, and we'll include a discussion of regulatory compliance management. Then we're going to transition and conduct two short product demonstrations, one of the 4C Risk product solution and one of Protect ERM. We will conclude with a Q&A session from you. Please use the GoToWebinar question panel to post your questions. We will answer all that we have time for, and I will be monitoring the questions panel, and I may ask our presenters to comment during their material. When the webinar ends, there will be a short survey. Please take a moment and complete the survey. It helps us improve additional content in the future. And lastly, these slides and this webinar recording will be available a few days from now on our website. So let's go ahead and get started. By way of introduction, I am joined by quite an esteemed group today. Our session is supported by a group of risk and compliance professionals across the industry. From ProTech Group, I am your moderator, and I'm joined by Jared Siddle, our Director of Risk, and Jessica Bellata, one of our solutions consultants. Jessica will be conducting our Protect ERM demonstration, and Jared will be presenting on the topic of regulatory compliance management. We are also joined, by our partner 4C Risk and two of their key stakeholders, Supra Apikanda, Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of 4C Risk. He will be leading the 4C Risk demonstration, and by Susan Palm, the Chief Revenue Officer of 4C Risk. There are three learning objectives for today's session. First, we want to help you understand the impact of AI, and in particular on regulatory compliance programs, because we believe that impact is pretty significant. Second, we want to help you understand how AI can make compliance programs more effective, especially if you're using manual processes and static data. And then lastly, we will provide guidance on how you can initiate an evaluation to consider AI technology in your compliance program. By way of background, ProTech Group is an enterprise risk management software company that supports our customers on all aspects of risk management, from training and education through framework and advisory services, and of course, Protect ERM, our award-winning enterprise risk and compliance management software that's used by more than 200,000 users across 450 clients. The product covers the full life cycle of enterprise risk and compliance, including risk assessments, continual monitoring of those risks through attestations and metrics, incident capture, treatment plans, whether you're working in regulatory compliance, operational risk, vendor risk, or cyber risk. Protect is used by more than 450 clients worldwide across a variety of markets, focusing on regulated industries like financial services. Now, while the company was established in 2000, we have the highest customer retention rate in the ERM software industry, reflecting how our customers do not outgrow us and they continue to get value from the solution for many years. Now, we're going to transition at this point to an introduction of our partner, 4C Risk, by Susan Palm. Susan.
Hi, thanks, Terry. I just want to take a moment to thank all of you for joining, and I know that you're interested in how AI can transform compliance and risk programs. Here at 4C Risk, we bring innovative AI-powered products to the market to solve key complex and day-to-day challenges for compliance. We leverage AI to quickly help you curate a rule book of laws and regulations that are specific to the jurisdictions in which you operate and the products that you bring to the market. We leverage these rule books to generate business language obligations that you can use in the creation of policies, controls, and procedures. We also scan the horizon and look for regulatory change information that could be of interest to you. Not just proposed rules, but also some of the comments that come in from some of your industry associations so that you can keep a tab on the kinds of changes and how those laws can be influenced. We then do something that's really quite interesting and innovative. We take this information about the rules and the laws, as well as rule changes, and we map them against your internal documents automatically in seconds to help you identify gaps that you may have in your control structure or your policies and your standards. This is really critical for clients who are continually dealing with regulatory change and trying to answer the question, how does this change affect my company? What do I need to do next? That is a piece that we are automating and helping you accelerate. Finally, if there is a gap, we can use generative AI to help you close that gap with business language. And then we have a conversational co-pilot, Aria, up there in the corner, who is monitoring all of the laws and regs, as well as your policies and documents, so that if your end users have a question, they can merely type that question into the prompt and get referential data back, answering the question in plain business language plain business language. So Aria is there to help answer questions, very complex questions, for your frontline users as well as your compliance group. So what sets us apart in our use of AI? We are all experienced GRC professionals that are working at 4C risk, and we recognize the importance of privacy and security of data, and therefore have built an ensemble of small language models that are specifically curated and trained on risk and compliance data, on laws, on regulations, on publicly available documents. And once this information has been trained, these models have been trained, we can deploy these models into your environment behind your four walls so that you can use the power of this technology within your own organization. Your data does not go out beyond the four walls, nor does it come back. So this is very important in terms of ensuring privacy and confidentiality, and we do not train our models on your customer or your internal data. In addition to that, really important, we provide confidence scores and explainability so that when Aria goes in and provides answers to questions, we give you a sense of the confidence that we have in the answers that we're able to generate. As AI applications continue to advance, we want to put you in the driver's seat to take advantage of AI technology that is truly transformational.
Thank you very much, Susan. Great introduction. This is the first of two polls, and I encourage you to participate. We have hundreds of people online, and your participation helps us learn what matters most to you. In our first poll question, we would like to understand, how are you actually automating regulatory change management today? We've given you four particular options. The first one, you're in the early stages. You really want to improve processes, maybe data and reporting. The second option, you're in the middle stages. You may have manual processes and tools. Maybe things are okay just the way they are. The third option is it's outsourced. You don't do much of that work at all yourself. You've got contractors, maybe they're legal advisors outside of the company advising you on regulatory changes. And then the last is what we consider advanced. You have already automated regulatory change management and compliance. You're using content from providers, you're getting change alerting and notifications, you're doing risk assessments and aligning policies and controls to reg obligations using technology, and life is grand. Let's give everybody a few more moments to respond.
I don't think life is ever great when you're in the regulatory world.
Well, that's a very astute observation, Susan. This is interesting results, about 33% in the early stages. This is consistent with what we have heard from speaking to people at conferences and doing other similar sessions. I am curious about that middle stages with manual processes and tools being almost 60% of the audience, which kind of ties back to the key topics of today. And Susan, I'm curious, from these results and your experience, why do you think we view technology as such a driver for managing regulatory change?
I think it's humanly impossible to stay on top of all the current and proposed rule changes. Even with a small army of people, there is a chance that you can miss something at the state level. The pace of change continues to accelerate. And even if you can hire a small army of talented SMEs, there's also another challenge. You can't keep these people trained and up to date with everything that is occurring, both at the national level and at the state level. So even when you get your arms around these reg changes, you now have to take that information and figure out, how does this affect my internal operations? What do I need to do in order to be compliant with these particular regulatory changes? And then training your front line to do the right thing. This is not something that can be scheduled. It has to happen on the fly, and it's not always the bumps and ups and downs of the workload are something that are really hard to staff for. So at Foresee Risk, we're automating a lot of the, what I would say, the more mundane work. Reading regulations, assessing what the impact of that regulation is, translating that into business language obligation. We really believe that in this year, more than ever, there is so much regulatory uncertainty that we have to be ready and we have to be prepared. In addition, we really are concerned, as we hear from our colleagues and our customers, about what is the future of the CFPB. I'm sure many of you see the question that's raised over again about funding the regulatory agencies. And in fact, this particular question of the legitimacy of the CFPB has gone all the way up to the Supreme Court. And there's a ruling that's expected to come down in June about the funding of the CFPB. There's been a preliminary outcome that is indicating the CFPB is constitutional. But again, this kind of back and forth has creates a lot of uncertainty about, do you need to hurry up and wait? You know, how fast do you need to be prepared? And given everything on your plate, it's a challenge to keep your arms around this. Even if there is a new administration that comes into office in this election period, there will be this ongoing question about the regulatory impact in the CFPB. This unfortunately doesn't take away the risk that is associated with state regulations. Because even if the CFPB is put to the side, the state regulators seem to be picking up the slack in terms of laws and regulations.
I think this is a really key topic. We see a lot of interest in regulatory compliance management as financial organizations, banks, and credit unions approach that 10 billion assets under management mark because of CFPB regulations kicking in, and they're getting ready for it in that 5, 6, 8 billion AUM range as they're growing. Susan, I think this is a really important topic, and I'm curious from your conversations, why do you think this is really important to your clients? What are you hearing from the market regarding the challenges of regulatory change in general?
Clients are finding that it's hard to grow their business organically, and so they're looking to expand their footprint into new states. And there's a lot of uncertainty about that because states are increasingly passing laws that impact the financial services market. or the junk fees market, or the exchange. So for companies who are looking to expand, they now have to take a look at all the new state laws they may be bumping into and ask themselves, do my existing controls, are they good enough? Do they satisfy these new regulations that are coming in? And by the way, for any of you who have tried to monitor the chaos around state regulations, you know that it's incredibly complex. They go into discussion, they go into committee, then they go to the floor for a vote, and you don't really know the timing of when these things are officially going to become law. So staying on top of that without having to go out and search through websites is really important. It seems that there are specific laws for all types of service providers, and sometimes the compliance department is the last to know about changes in your company that would bring a whole new set of legal implications to your organization.
This brings to mind an insurance customer that we were working with who operates in about a dozen states, who felt that they had their arms around regulatory compliance and change management until they didn't, and they actually missed a change and were fined as a result of it. So I think this is a really timely topic. Let's jump to our second poll. Oops, I'm sorry, we missed a slide there.
Well, let me just take one more moment, Terry, to talk about the state laws that you mentioned.
Yes.
There's long been the belief, and it's stood up legally, that a federally chartered bank is responsible for following the federally legislated laws, not necessarily the state laws. That has come under question. And there's been a recent case that has come forward, although the Supreme Court has held that there isn't a rule for determining whether federal law preempts a company from state legislatures. They left it a bit vague in terms of the case and the output. So for those of you who are federally chartered and believed that you don't have to worry about some of these state nuances because you're a federally chartered bank, that has now come into question. And so this is a case that is being watched very carefully for specific outcomes and challenges. Terry, back to you.
Thanks, Susan. So let's move into our second poll. The second poll is really about you. We'd like to understand what is going on with regulatory change management in your actual organization. So when you think about reg change management at your organization, what is your top concern? What are you talking about with your risk or compliance committees or with the board? Are you concerned about missing regulatory changes themselves? Are you concerned about a misinterpretation of what that regulatory content means to your organization? Or perhaps you're struggling with or concerned about the mapping of controls in your risk framework to regulatory obligations. Or lastly, perhaps it's simply concern about the mapping of policies. Are we sure, do we have confidence that our policies are covering those regulations and their obligations through the implementation of our controls? So let's take a moment to allow people to respond to the poll. Thank you all once again for participating in the polls. We are monitoring the questions section of GoToWebinar and will be answering your questions as we get towards the end. And these are our results. So this is interesting that one of the main concerns of the audience is actually the mapping of controls. Believe me, we hear this all the time in the market. I know that our friends at Foresee Risk do as well, because quite frankly, it's hard, it's complicated, and it's messy. And that mapping of controls permeates the risk framework and the activities that are taking place across your risk program. Jared, I want to ask a question to you as we transition into your presentation content. Jared has been a Chief Risk Officer in 3 different financial services institutions. He's our resident subject matter expert as a former practitioner. How can a compliance program really benefit from AI, from the technology and the application of the technology? And in particular, does this allow an organization to accelerate the compliance program in a way that the work can be more effectively performed and maybe with even less resources?
Thanks, Terry. And looking back at the poll, there was a even display across those responses. From my perspective, it was like if you could have chose the 5th option, which was all of the above, I think I would have chosen that sitting in my old position. To your point and what you're saying here then about from a regulatory perspective, though, compliance is always in motion. So that's what we believe at ProTech ERM. It's really around understanding, as Susan said, around the rule book. You have the clear content that is provided to you, that you have a clear rule book, that then you're then taking the views of sort of what is changing and what is on your horizon scan around what is changing. And that's very difficult to do. And you need proactive tools to help you to understand what those are. In addition to what the scan tells you is then what does it mean? And then getting the information back around understanding the regulation and what that then means for you in terms of actions and compliance activities is vitally important. And as Susan mentioned, she mentioned around policies. Policy is also, and in the poll, policy and then changing those policies is another process, another set of activities that you need to make sure that you're in compliance both of external requirements and then your internal requirements as well. So we call that compliance in motion, which brings together the regulatory content, the change content, the metrics, then linking to, as you mentioned, controls and risk assessments, pulling those also into the compliance framework, as well as their metrics and compliance findings and auditing activity. So for me, it's around proactive monitoring. It's around internal collaboration with legal counsel, with other individuals within the business for your products and services, for your strategy, for your culture, and for your operations. It's being able, from a compliance person's perspective, is pulling those all together to help you manage your business now and for the future. You need trusted advisors as well, those either law firms or individuals such as ourselves and 4C Risk to help you build the program that you need now and into the future that is efficient and effective. And I think it's always important as a compliance individual, not only you're looking at your competition, your industry, but sometimes it's important to look outside the industry. And I've used that at times when looking at nuclear or aerospace in my own previous backgrounds. If we go to the next slide, I just wanted to sort of like tie together the activities that we're talking about. So you get an end-to-end regulatory change management process. As Susan mentioned, you've got the federal, state, local, even international rules. You need the rule book. You need to be doing the scanning, which takes time. It takes months to pull some of this information together. You then need to then review your policies and look at then, Super will discuss this as well around traceability, doing the scannings across your policies. And then those changes and governance need to be managed with your board of directors or with the appetite of the organization, and to then make sure that you're in compliance with those new policies and procedures that you're changing. That gives you the whole compliance posture, and that compliance posture touches then upon the risk assessments you're performing, the compliance and the compliance controls you're checking, as well as then managing any employee or control attestations. That drives you then into actions or really finding an issues if you identify those from the reviews of both policy, controls, risk assessments. They may even be coming through from metrics, but you then need to communicate those, make sure that those are then displayed across the entire organization that brings the entire compliance framework together. So it could be an internal audit review, an external audit review, an examination. Those details also need to be collected and contained from an action management perspective. And then finally is then getting to look at the measure metrics, and then how is your posture and how are you changing and how are you reviewing both compliance handling, code of ethics or conflicts of interest. Those items will also be changing in the processes themselves, but you need to be making sure that you're managing and reviewing the entire program and looking across, as Susan really quite eloquently put was the whole change management that we're dealing with right at the beginning, which is the rule book and your own internal and external activities that are changing around you. So I think next we're going to go into the demonstrations. Really, I think you'll see from Supra is the regulatory content, the rule books, and the change that's going to take place. I think we then look to Jess from ProTech ERM to talk around how we look at the compliance in motion and integrated seamlessly between those two areas. So I'll hand over to Supra, and he can take it away with his demonstration.
Excellent. Thanks, Jared. Supra.
All right. Force's platform is designed to help organizations accelerate their regulatory change management process. We help our customers research and identify regulatory requirements, regulations, and authoritative documents to identify requirements that really matter for their organizations. We help them identify those regulatory requirements and map those to their compliance artifacts, such as their policies, procedures, risks, controls, to identify gaps in their compliance process. And last but not the least, we help them identify changes to those external regulatory requirements and then see how we can accelerate their process around the change management associated with those regulatory changes. What you're seeing here is our regulatory research solution. You're seeing a data lake that has been created based on requirements from multiple authoritative sources, different jurisdictions, be it your federal regulations, state regulations, guidance from agencies, different jurisdictions, international regulations. All these requirements are part of our data lake. As a subject matter expert, I can specify the scope for my research and a particular topic that I'm interested in, and the system nicely summarizes this information for me by topics and by sections or subsections within the regulation, letting me know here are the number of regulations that are present. I can go to a particular search result and then see the details or the relevant section or subsection where the requirements are contained. And within a matter of seconds, now I can extract this information into something called a rule book, a rules inventory for my organization. I can also collaborate with other users in the system to see if there's any particular area that we should focus on and extract all this information into a rule book. I can select particular areas, or if I'm interested in extracting the entire information, all I do is just click on this button, and within a matter of seconds, system is parsing that information out into a rule book. Something that used to take days and weeks is now getting done within a matter of seconds. Once the rulebook is extracted, it's available under my space. I can see all the requirements parsed out and nicely arranged by header information, section, subsection. All these details are available for further processing from my side. I can also see AI has augmented this information, and now it is showing me which of these requirements are really actionable for me, or something that is just informative or definition. So there is a type classification that is happening by AI here to let me know if this particular requirement is applicable to my organization or not. There's also matter information that is displayed to me to show me if this requirement is related to disclosures or record keeping or fees or anything of that type. I can extract this information, or I can push this information into a GRC system like Protect, where these citations are available for the downstream compliance activities. Now I can take this rule book and start comparing against my compliance artifacts to see how well these requirements are covered in my policies and procedures. In one of the poll questions, you all had mentioned that you are worried about mapping these requirements to your policies or identify controls where you have coverage, and this is where we provide that insights. On what you're seeing here is a visual representation of the requirements that you saw just a moment ago that were parsed out on the left vertical, and on the right vertical are truth in lending disclosures. Typically, this document is available to us in a PDF format. Platform automatically parses that information into sections and subsection and starts to build the compliance mapping grounds up. It's letting you know that here are the requirements that are in green that are very well covered in the TILA disclosure, truth in lending disclosures. Areas where it is yellow, it is showing you that subject matter experts should review and apply their subjectivity to assess further. And more importantly, at the click of a button, it has now identified these red nodes, letting you know that there is a compliance weakness, there is a gap in compliance. The detailed textual description associated with this visual map is displayed on the screen. System clearly shows here are the compliance requirements that are mapped and to which policy statements these are mapped. And here are the areas where requirements are not mapped in the policy or the disclosure, therefore there is a compliance weakness. Now this is where it gets very interesting. AI is able to generate language for the subject matter experts to be incorporated as part of their policies and procedures. User can just click on certain on the requirements that are really gaps for them, and click on this button called Ask ARIA, and system automatically now generates a policy language that can be incorporated as part of their policies. Of course, there is a subject matter expert in the loop here. Everything that you are seeing here is generated within a matter of few minutes. All this picture is presented within a few minutes, but we have subject matter expert in the loop to review these mappings and confirm if they have to make any, if they want to make any updates to partial requirements to strong or so. While we facilitate this process of looking at the effective rules and comparing those against the compliance artifacts, we also facilitate the entire change management process using our regulatory change management solution. We have access to over 2,300 sources across different jurisdictions, across different document types, over 50 different document types, such as bills, proposed rules, final rules, interim rules. All those are captured as soon as those changes occur within the from the agencies. And we further facilitate the process of helping the users do an intake process where users can collaborate with other users in the system to understand if a particular change is applicable to them. If a particular change is not applicable, they can archive the alert in the system, and then maintain it as for future reference. And if a change is applicable, system really facilitates at this point of time a workflow that can be used to automate or to accelerate the change management process. We have a AI-driven workflow that starts with the scoping step, helps users perform applicability analysis, do a detailed impact analysis against their compliance artifacts, and help them identify action items that can be implemented in the downstream systems. I'm going to take a particular example that is related to credit card penalty fees that was published in the month of March. Our system captured the change, presented the change to the user on their dashboard, and then now it summarized the information for the user. If the summary is present, then our system extracts the summary, shows it to the user. Otherwise, AI generates the summary for them. It captures the document that was published as part of the change. This is a PDF document that was published by the agency. It captures that information. And with answer to a few questions, such as if this alert is applicable to the organization, and a few other questions, system decides the workflow. It's not a linear workflow. Really depending upon the responses that the user has provided, system actually decides what the workflow should look like. And as the user goes to the next step, now system is parsing this complex PDF document that can exist in different structure. All this is unstructured information, but our system is able to read that PDF document and identify requirements from that document that may be relevant for the organization. It has identified that information, organized it by title, section, subsection information, and then further augmented this information for subject matter expert with classifications, with breakdown of which requirements may be applicable to them, which may not be applicable to them. As I can see, as I review the information, I can see some requirements are related to, some requirements are just for my information, but others are prescriptive and permissive and prohibitive that I need to look into. While I do this work, AI is now further helping me map these requirements to my compliance taxonomy, such as my business units, locations, products, and services. And all this is happening automatically, where system is learning from the patterns of information mapping that has been done in past, and it's recommending these are the potential business units, locations, or products that are getting impacted. Of course, there's an 80-20 rule here. AI does much of the work, but subject matter experts review this further to confirm if they want to make any adjustments to the mapping. As the user proceeds with the review of these requirements, system automatically identifies documents that may be relevant for this change assessment or impact assessment. Of course, users can go into the system and identify additional policies that may be relevant over and above or beyond what AI has identified. As an end user, I specify the priority of the alert, specify a due date, and then as I go to the next step, now system is drawing a detailed impact analysis for me. Now it's telling me that these are the regulatory requirements that have changed on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, it has mapped it against the disclosures document, and it's letting me know that there are certain areas that are yellow. That means there is not the coverage is not available in the disclosure. Also, there are gaps in these changes that are not covered in the policy. The detailed explanation of all these are present on the screen, and now I can go into a particular requirement that I'm worried about and then click on this particular option to document action items. As I identify action item, system extracts the information relevant to that particular requirement, and wherever partial matches were identified, all that package is extracted for the user and then have identify date or timelines by when these requirements need to be implemented. It's very easy for us to integrate this information into the product system. We extract this information, we give the ability to extract this information and see it help the users take that package to other systems where this information can be imported. With Protect, we have a integration where this information can be pushed directly into the database, Protect database. System extracts the complete package. It highlights which requirements are mapped strong, which requirements are mapped partial, unmapped, and also the details of the regulatory requirements and the policy statements that are mapped, whether it is mapped partial or strong. The entire, all the list of action items that were identified are all cataloged, and with the push of a button, this information now goes into Protect for downstream compliance activities.
Super, that's tremendous in terms of what I've just seen. From my experience, it took months to make sure pulling over all of this information and to really work on this. What's been your experience working with clients and how they use the system and the integration?
Absolutely, that's a wonderful question. We often see that the prior state or before implementing a system like this, we often see that our customer spends weeks or months actually working through this kind of a change. That's primarily because there is so much information that is coming from the authoritative sources. The documents are unstructured. These are elaborate documents that require coordination from multiple teams within the customer departments. And now using our system where AI is doing all this work, this information is complete. The mapping is being provided in a matter of just few minutes and hours to facilitate the downstream process.
That's tremendous.
Jared, if I could just jump in, we had one client who was looking at the compliance to NIST, and they had lots of documents. They didn't know which ones to pull. So we ended up loading about 34 different documents into the system. And after we loaded them and hit the button, literally took 19 minutes to do a complete analysis of all of the requirements of NIST against all of their internal documents, their control standards and procedures. Our client told us this would have taken them 6 months to figure this all out, but we were able to get them started very quickly.
That's tremendous.
This is where the power of AI is very important, and it's an accelerator. It's not going to replace what somebody's going to do. He's going in now and reviewing everything very systematically, but he has a real head start on the work that he needs to do.
That's tremendous, Susan. So Jess, shall we hand over to you then on the integration then from information from 4C risk and hand over to you?
Yes, thank you, Jared, and thank you, Subra. Is everyone able to see my screen?
Yes.
Just get your faces out of my way. Okay, so now I'm going to take a look at things from the perspective of a risk compliance manager using Protect's ERM tool. So as Subra mentioned in his demonstration about change management. So as a director of compliance or a compliance manager, I'm obviously very concerned about the regulations that my organization is tracking and any changes that may ultimately impact how compliant I remain. So one of the great things about the integration or relationship we have with 4C Risk is that we are able to get that information about change management through their scan horizon. So as we can see here right now, I'm looking at a list of recent alerts that have come in. And in keeping with Supra's example, we can take a look at the credit card penalty fees. I can see from my list that that is applicable. There's something that may affect me in terms of my compliance. So the information that's pulled in from 4C Risk gives us some pertinent info, the requirement source. We can find out what the alert title is, who the issuing agency is, etc. Also of importance is the publication date and the effective date. As we mentioned, this is very, very recent, as of May 2024. So I'm really able to get a leg up in terms of, like, this is something that's happened very recently. I can make sure that my organization is on top of it. It may impact me. So having that ability to get something that quickly is very, very helpful. I also get a summary of what the change is. And then using Protect, I have the ability to add my own sort of steps that follow. So now I know I have a change that comes in. So then what, as a risk manager, do I do with it? I can determine the jurisdictions that it's related to, any local regions. I can go ahead and link it out to the specific regulation that it's attached to. And then I can also assign action. So I'm aware now that there's a possible change. So I'm going to want to have my group, someone in my group, perform a risk assessment just to see how this change might affect us. So from here, I can actually assign out an action. If I go ahead and click into the action, I can see that I'm going to assign out someone in my group to conduct a regulatory risk assessment for the change in credit card fees under Regulation Z, based on this latest alert that we've gotten in. And we can determine whether or not it has a regulatory connection. Yes, it does. We use tagging in Protect. So tagging allows us to consistently link different things together. So my risks, my controls, my compliance management, all of those different areas can be linked via tags. So this, of course, lends itself to consistent information, but also consistent reporting, dashboarding, things like that. I can assign a priority to my action, and then who owns that action, who's going to have to complete it, any relevant contributors who might be involved in it as well. And then as things move along the process, I can just continue to update where are we in this process of completing the risk assessment. And then, of course, when it's finished, I can do a closure. So really just kind of highlighting the impact of having that ability to get that change management notification as soon as possible, and then take action on it through my my risk and compliance product. So from here, I'm going to go into the actual risk assessments very briefly. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my regulatory risk assessments. What we're looking at here is a list of all of my regulatory risk assessments. You can see for other areas as well as Reg Z, we have BSA AML. So I'm tracking all of my compliance regulations right now. I'm looking at everything in terms of risk assessments. And then if I go down below, I can see under Truth in Lending that we have that credit card penalty fee risk assessment in progress. So again, just kind of quickly going through this, we have the ability to tag, as I mentioned before. Not only that, we link the actual regulatory requirement to the risk assessment. So you have a link directly out to the regulation that has changed. We can identify a risk factor, and then we perform our standard risk assessment. So we determine our inherent risk rating. In this case, we've determined that it's moderate. We can then give a rationale as to why. Once we've determined what our inherent risk rating is, we're then going to implement the necessary controls to mitigate. So we can do that here. Again, the control that we are showing here is coming from our control library. In Protect, we have a group, a repository called Central Libraries, where we can pull things like risks, controls, business units, all sorts of different things. Again, keeping things consistent, because we know if you're using spreadsheets, you can sometimes have issues with continuity in terminology. Some people may say the same thing a different way. By having a library to pull all of this information, it just really lends itself to a lot of consistency and your ability to do your job better and to report better to your stakeholders. And then below that, we have the ability to do control testing if necessary. So if you wanted to perform a control test on the control, you can do that based on the testing that's been done here. We can see that it's the design is adequate. And then as a result, we give it an effective rating. Then after we put those controls in place, we are left with our residual risk rating, which in this case, after the controls has come out to be low. And then of course, we can go ahead and give a rationale and an acceptance rationale for why we have determined that no further treatment is necessary in this case. So we have successfully completed our risk assessment and brought down our inherent rating from moderate to low. Okay, so that was a lot, but now I just want to briefly pop into two dashboards, and then I will be able to wrap up. So the first thing we're going to look at is our regulatory compliance scorecard, and Jared alluded to this earlier. We at Protect view things from a life cycle perspective. So in this case, we have the regulatory compliance scorecard. This score is basically giving you kind of the overall score for your regulatory compliance program. And that score is driven by what we call the elements of the life cycle of compliance. So that would include things like identifying your regulatory requirements, then collecting attestations and metrics through KRIs. Then you can identify and assign any actions that may be necessary. You can also raise findings or issues, and then finally dealing with any incidents. So all that sort of rolls up into your overall health score, which in this case is driven by the activity that is being done on a regulation level. So since we're looking at Regulation Z, we can kind of look across and see what kind of activity is taking place from my Regulation Z perspective. I can see that I have, I'm compliant in my regulatory requirements, but I do have some overdue findings. There have been some estimated losses. So this gives me sort of an insight into what's happening from each of my different regulation levels. So since we're looking at Reg Z, we'll just stick with that example. And if I just pop in, I'm gonna actually just go because I've already got it open here. But this will take me into what we call our regulatory drill down, or I'm sorry, compliance drill down report. And this report is really one of my favorites in Protect. It really gives you a comprehensive breakdown into a specific regulation. So here again, we're looking at Reg Z. I can see what my health score is just for that particular regulation. I can see my inherent and residual risk rating. I can see if I've got some red KRIs, any overdue issues or incidents. I can make comments, review comments as I go through. As a manager, I'm able to comment on things, and I can also, as I comment over time, these will just build, so I'll be able to kind of look at them over time. I'm able to see my heat map as well as my residual risks, the top residual risks. I can see any assessments and controls that are related to Regulation Z, and then if I scroll down a little bit further, I'm able to see things like KRIs and how they are trending for Regulation Z. I can also see trends for any incidents, and then I can also see breakdowns by incident severity. And then you'll notice below each one of the dashboard graphs, we have the list view so that we can see where is this information coming from. Well, it's coming from here. These are our incident details, and then we're able to roll up to those trends in the graphs. And the same things for findings and issues. I can see my findings and issues by ratings, and so on. So then, you kind of get the hint here, but we are just looking at actions trend, what our actions are by due date. And then finally, we can see the specific regulatory requirements that all of this report has been built upon. And in this case, it's being associated with Regulation Z. So in addition to that relationship we have with foresee risk that allows us to keep up to date with our compliance change. You can see through Protect, you have a lot of flexibility in terms of organizing your compliance program and kind of staying on top of it as a whole, in addition to being able to assign actions and follow-ups, things of that nature. So it's really great way to keep yourself compliant in all areas. So that's going to do it for my demo. Thank you very much for your time. I'll turn it back over to Terry.
Thanks, Jess. Appreciate the overview. Great introduction and summary of what Protect ERM can actually do in regulatory change management and regulatory compliance management, especially with a partner with 4C Risk. To wrap us up, we've got about 10 more minutes. We have a lot of questions. I thought it would be helpful to dive into the Q&A session as quickly as possible. And just a note to the audience, if we run out of time, the additional questions that have been asked, we'll actually answer them, and you'll get them in the follow-up to the webinar where we actually put a Q&A page on the website. So we will get to them ultimately. I'm going to start with a question to Susan, and I got to tell you, I think 4 different people asked this question, so it's a pretty important one. Simple enough. Can you describe the scope of regulations that 4C Risk can handle? The questions are around, are you limited to certain countries, which tends to be a challenge of most reg content tech providers? Are you limited to state versus federal, to local jurisdictions? Can you comment on that for a second?
So we are not limited to just US laws and regulations. We manage a global rule book. Both at the state level. So as long as there is a feed available from an agency or a state or any regulator globally, we pull that in to our data lake, as Supra referred to it as a data lake of regulations. But when we do your implementation, we're really careful so that you're not overwhelmed, and we sit down and curate the feed that you find necessary based on the laws and the jurisdictions in which you operate, or you could be interested in laws or jurisdictions that you don't operate in yet, but you're thinking about moving into, and you may want to start doing some what-if analysis.
Excellent, thanks. And the second question, actually, I'm going to direct to you as well, Susan. Jared, sit tight. I promise I've got a list for you as well, sir. In your experience in working with your clients, compliance and risk professionals, I think we would all agree, they often tend to operate in their own silos for a whole variety of reasons, company size, company growth, maturity, whatever. In your customers' experience, are those silos, are those teams coming closer together enabled by the technology that is supporting their activity?
Absolutely, they are. If you think about it from a risk perspective, you start to see risk organizations taking a more risk-based approach in doing their RCSAs and their testing, and compliance professionals are the one who have their finger on the pulse with respect to compliance implications or legal regulatory implications. So We're starting to see now that those teams with these kind of integrations that we shared with you today, that the information that the compliance team is trudging through day to day can easily be pushed into a GRC tool, and Protect can take that information and run a risk and control self-assessment, can create and manage action items, etc. So we are starting to see a lot more collaboration, starting a little bit on the IT side with IT compliance, for sure, around privacy and maybe just some specific use cases, but we are starting to see that collaboration. And interestingly, Terry, there's another group that's coming to the table that we haven't seen before, and that's the legal team. I mean, the general counsel, the government relations people are starting to look at the technology as a huge enabler for them. And now they're starting their processes using this technology, and their information's being, getting pushed down into GRC for risk and control self-assessments.
Excellent. Very, very interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Susan. Jared, I've got a couple of questions here. Let me start with the first one. This one is more strategic around managing the work. What strategies can we employ to prioritize and manage the implementation timelines when there's multiple regulatory changes happening effectively at the same time or in similar patterns?
Good question, Terry. I would also lean to what Susan just said. It'd be risk-based. What's the most appropriate in terms of the highest priority from a risk perspective, and drive the program from that point of view. That said, many programs are just dealt with on a silo basis when you're dealing program changes to products and services. So you may have to make sure that you're pulling the information from 4C risk that actually helps you from multiple opportunities to then help you just in that one program dealing with that one project that you may be managing as a result of regulatory change that may have taken place. That's a good question, but that will be my risk-based approach will be my response to it.
Excellent, thank you. Susan, another question back to you. Can you discuss the role of data analytics in identifying compliance risks and how it can be used to prioritize regulatory changes?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Right now, what we're seeing is, I want to take that question, Terry, and also take a little bit on the question that you mentioned to Jared, which is multiple projects coming in at the same time that have some common denominators. From a 4C risk perspective, we're not limited to just mapping one particular rule against a set of controls. We can take multiple rules or multiple regulatory changes and batch them together in a file and then use that to compare to your controls, etc. So I just wanted to point that out, that we do not have to really move sequentially, although Jared's point is right on target, which is now that you've mapped that together, you're going to see gaps, and that is where you need to take a risk-based approach based on the implications of those particular laws. With regard specifically to data analytics, the beauty of AI and its ability to process information very quickly allows us to answer questions and generate patterns. You know, things that are being asked, things that are similar, questions that might be similar, legal requirements that don't say the exact same thing, but the intent may be similar. So we're now able to look at information from a multidimensional perspective and bring common information together more easily. Does that get to you, the question?
It does, and actually there are two follow-up questions that are related to this topic. So Jared, I'm going to ask you to sit tight because I do have one more for you, but I want to get these in because they're around the same topic, and they cover a handful of questions that have come from our esteemed audience. One is about the accuracy and reliability of AI-driven compliance tools. Are there key metrics that organizations are using to monitor the AI tool performance? But that relates to another question that we were asked, which is around large language models in AI. Without getting too technical, they're generally not trained on client internal documents, such as policies. And how do you address issues such as regulatory naming nomenclature differences, internal client naming conventions versus regulatory naming conventions that don't exactly map? So I've asked two questions. They're kind of related, but you decide how best to answer, please.
Yeah, I'm going to turn this over to Supra on the second part of that question, but let me just go back to the first part of the question, which was the accuracy of the AI models. As I mentioned earlier, we have built small language models that can be deployed within a client's four walls, and they are further trained on a company's internal policies, procedures, controls, the kinds of things that we're asking questions about. What we do at 4C Risk is we provide confidence factors. So when we are answering a question or providing data back, we can also include a confidence score that helps the reader know how confident is the AI model in answering that specific question. We also have Aria, our co-pilot, will provide, when you ask a question, let's say you want to know something about privacy rules in the state of Colorado, for example, ARIA will come back with an answer, but also bring back the referential data that ARIA looked at in order to find that answer, and then give you the ability to see precisely what ARIA read when ARIA came back with that answer.
Excellent.
So again, the human in the loop is critical in terms of assessing and providing feedback. And so the human in this case would say thumbs up or thumbs down, depending on how well they felt ARIA had answered it, which is additional information now that goes back into the training of those models that are sitting within your four walls.
Excellent.
Long answer, Terry, but
it's a
lot
big
going
question.
on here.
Excellent job. We are just about out of time. I want to ask Jared one more question and then we'll wrap up. Again, a reminder to the audience, as you sign off, please do take a moment to answer the survey that will come up automatically from GoToWebinar. Jared, this one is about how do you accurately assess the impact of new regulations on existing processes and allocate the resources according to ensure that compliance isn't going to overburden other teams?
Another good question. So where are you right now with your posture? I think you'd use tools such as 4C Risk to tell you where you are with your policies, the governance, and then you'd start to then review your risk in motion going across the activities of risk assessment, controls, the gaps, filling those gaps, and then dealing with the metrics to then pull you all the way forward. Obviously, from a compliance perspective, you're dealing with regulatory risk that may live depending on the organization within their operational risk areas, but then you also need to think about the other risk types that may be impacting you, as well as culturally as well. There's now new emphasis around conduct risk. The New York Fed has got an initiative there to push out, and that also brings together the necessity to use like 4C Risk as a vehicle to help you understand what those regulatory changes could be and look elsewhere globally where, for example, conduct risk is being used. So I think that you can use 4C Risk and use ProTech to help you with the overall compliance posture, the overall risk posture within your organization.
And Terry, do you mind if I just clarify a point I said earlier? We create, when we're training the models that are the small language models used by the clients, we use synthetic data for any kind of training. So there is no specific customer data that is used to train the models. I want to make that really clear.
Thank you. That's a helpful clarification. We're out of time. Thanks everybody for hanging on a few moments past the top of the hour. Thank you very much to Jared, Supra, Jessica, Susan for your participation and for the excellent content and material. We will cover the additional questions that we didn't get to after the fact in our FAQs on the webpage. The recording, the slides will be made available to everybody. Thank you very much. Please check out protechgroup.com, check out 4crisk.ai to learn more and reach out to us to schedule time with us and learn more about both solutions working together. Thanks everybody.
Great.
Have a wonderful day.
Have a nice weekend, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.